The restaurant hummed with soft jazz and candlelight. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware chimed gently against porcelain, and the quiet murmur of conversations filled the air like a warm current. Alina stood just beyond the host's stand, one hand resting on her small baby bump, the other smoothing the folds of her ivory dress. She had chosen this place carefully, elegant but intimate, a place that once held meaning. Darius was already seated at their reserved table near the window. He didn't rise when she approached, didn't offer his usual half-smile. His phone was in his hand, his attention elsewhere. She paused for a heartbeat, long enough to notice the faint disapproval in his eyes when he finally looked up. "You're late," he said, not harshly, just cool. Traffic was slow," she murmured, pulling out her chair. No greeting, no kiss, not even a glance toward her stomach. She lowered herself into the seat, trying to ignore the flicker of disappointment. Maybe he had a long day. Maybe he just needed time to warm up. But then the server arrived, and before she could speak, Darius ordered for both of them, wine for him, sparkling water for her, and the chef's special. No questions, no discussion. Just like that, the night settled into a rhythm she hadn't expected. She tried to find her footing in small talk. The weather. The nursery. A story about a client who had sent a thank you card. Darius barely responded. He nodded, checked his watch, and once scrolled through a message under the table. When he finally spoke more than a sentence, it came wrapped in something sharper. "You know, Alina, it wouldn't hurt to dress like you used to," he said, eyes lingering on her neckline. "Pregnancy doesn't mean giving up completely." She blinked, stunned into stillness. The candles flickered between them. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The ache landed first in her chest, then settled deep in her stomach, lower than the child, heavier than the silence. "I thought I looked nice tonight," she said quietly. "You look fine," he said, shrugging. "Just not like before." Inside, her heart gave a slow, tired twist. There was a time when Darius would have brushed her hair behind her ear and whispered that she glowed. A time when they'd sat across this very table, fingers laced, talking about names for a child they hadn't even conceived yet. She remembered laughing so hard she spilled wine down her dress. He'd called it charming. He'd kissed the stain and said it made her real. Now he looked through her like a project he'd lost interest in midway. Alina glanced out the window, trying to steady herself. Outside, a street lamp buzzed faintly over a quiet sidewalk. The rain had just stopped. A thin sheet of mist curled along the curb like breath waiting to be exhaled. She watched it drift, her eyes softening. The light from the candle cast a gentle glow across the white linen tablecloth, pooling around her untouched fork. And in that stillness, beneath the music and murmured laughter of other tables, Alina understood something she hadn't wanted to admit until now. He wasn't coming back. Not the man she married. And maybe he had never really been there at all. The server had just cleared their plates when Darius leaned back in his chair, swirling the last of his wine in the glass. His gaze wasn't on Alina. It drifted beyond her, scanning the restaurant as if searching for something more interesting than conversation. Alina sat quietly across from him, hands resting gently on the tablecloth. The sparkle of the candles caught the thin gold band on her finger. She traced it absently with her thumb, like a reflex that still hadn't faded. "You've barely touched your food," Darius said, finally meeting her eyes. She offered a small smile. "I wasn't that hungry." He didn't press, just nodded, then checked his phone again, thumb tapping, screen glowing against the shadows of the room. His detachment was clinical, almost casual. But to Alina, it felt like standing in the echo of a conversation that had ended long before the words did. She watched him, the way his jaw tightened as he read a message, the crease that appeared between his brows. Once, she would have reached across the table, touched his hand, asked what was wrong. Now, she wasn't sure he would notice. She sipped her water, more out of habit than thirst. Inside, something quiet flickered. Not anger, not quite sadness, more like recognition, an acknowledgement that they had drifted too far out to swim back. There had been a time when just the sight of Darius walking through a doorway made her heart quicken. In their early days, he was all ambition and charm, with eyes that lit up when he talked about building a future together. He used to bring her coffee during long work nights, read her blueprints like they were poetry. They used to talk until dawn, legs tangled on the couch, dreaming aloud like nothing could touch them. But time had worn those edges smooth. Success came, money followed, so did distance. They moved into a bigger house, their schedules filled with meetings and travel. Conversations turned into logistics. Who'd pick up dry cleaning? Who would be home for the contractor? Affection became routine. Touches became quick. And slowly, without either of them saying it out loud, the space between them filled with silence too familiar to feel alarming. Alina shifted in her seat now, fingers brushing over her stomach. He didn't notice. Instead, he lifted his wine glass and said, almost offhandedly, "You know, it's strange. I used to imagine what our 10th anniversary would look like." Alina looked up, surprised by the sudden dip into memory. "Oh?" she asked, cautious. He shrugged. "Private villa. Somewhere on the coast, you in something red, me with less gray." She smiled faintly, the image soft but distant. "I used to imagine it too," she said, her voice quieter. "Just a little differently." They both went silent. Outside, the sky had darkened. Streetlights glowed faintly behind the tall windows, casting long gold reflections across the table. Somewhere, a couple laughed, low and easy, the sound brushing past like a breeze. Alina couldn't quite reach. She turned to look toward it, not out of jealousy, but out of a quiet longing, for simplicity, for closeness, for the version of them that once existed in small apartments and late-night takeout. She couldn't hear the words of that laughter, but she remembered what it used to sound like when it was theirs. The clink of a bell over the restaurant door broke the lull between them. A breeze followed, cool and unexpected, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and something softer. Alina looked up, almost by instinct, and there he was. Leon stood just inside the entrance, brushing droplets from the shoulders of his dark coat. His eyes scanned the room, then stopped when they found hers. A quiet smile curved across his face, not performative, not practiced, just real. Alina felt her breath catch. Darius followed her gaze with a bored glance, then paused. His posture stiffened, his jaw tightening in almost imperceptible increments. He watched as Leon crossed the room, every step deliberate, unhurried. "Alina," Leon said when he reached the table. "Sorry I'm late." His voice was warm, familiar. It didn't try to dominate the space, it simply filled it. He leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And just like that, Alina remembered what comfort felt like. She hadn't noticed how tense her body was until it softened under his touch. Darius cleared his throat, loud enough to be heard, but not enough to be obvious. "Friend of yours?" he asked, the words brittle around the edges. Alina hesitated. For a second she felt 16 again, caught between fear and defiance. "This is Leon," she said, steadying herself. "My partner. Leon, this is Darius." There was a pause, sharp and fragile, the kind that hung in the air like crystal just before it cracks. Leon extended his hand with effortless grace. "Nice to meet you." Darius took it, grip firm, jaw set. Likewise. They held each other's gaze for a moment too long, two men reading the same page in different languages. Alina sat still, pulse slow and strange in her ears. There was no shouting, no scene, just quiet tension, polite and loaded. "I should get going," Darius said abruptly, standing and straightening his jacket. "Vanessa's waiting." He said it without looking at Alina, though the name hit like a spark on dry wood. She remembered that name from old conversations, quiet emails, suspicious smiles. She had never asked, he had never admitted, and that had been enough to leave a hollow where trust used to be. Darius gave a small nod to Leon, then walked out. No goodbye, no second glance. Only the scent of expensive cologne lingered behind him, dissolving into the low hum of the restaurant. Leon slid into the seat across from her and reached for her hand. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. Alina nodded slowly, but part of her still stared at the door, at the space where Darius had just been. Not out of longing, but because she could finally see it clearly now. The absence he carried even when he was in the room. Outside, the rain had started again, thin and steady, streaking softly down the window pane beside her. Like something trying to be heard, but not quite strong enough to knock. 2 days passed, quiet but restless. It was late morning when Alina found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes she hadn't opened in over a year. Dust clung to the flaps. She didn't know why she'd pulled them out. Maybe it was the gray sky, or maybe it was the silence that had started to feel too loud. She opened the top box and pulled out an old photo album, leather-bound, frayed at the corners. Her fingers paused on the first page, where a photo from their early days smiled back at her. Darius, sunburned and laughing, with his arms slung over her shoulder outside a tiny art museum. She looked young in the picture. Young in the way that means believing effort will always be enough. She turned the page. Snapshots from college, road trips, late nights in small apartments, the years before ambition grew teeth. She ran her fingers over one photo of them in a hardware store, holding paint swatches, arguing over eggshell versus ivory. Back then, even disagreements had felt like teamwork. A vibration on the table pulled her out of it. Her phone lit up. Amira. She picked it up. "Did you see it?" Amira's voice came in bright, fast, and unfiltered. The Chronicle just posted a feature on Brandon and Vanessa's engagement party. Full-blown society page drama. Apparently, it's going to be massive. Alina pressed the album closed. "I hadn't seen it, but I ran into him." The line went quiet for half a second. "Wait, what?" "He showed up at the restaurant the other night, sat right across from me," Alina said, her voice light but carefully even. "Didn't recognize Leon, asked a few questions, left." Amira let out a slow breath. "God, of course he did, and now he's throwing this big show?" That man never'd know the meaning of quiet dignity. Alina half smiled, tracing the edge of the album with her thumb. They used to talk about renewing their vows for their 10th anniversary. Something small, Alina had imagined. Just family, close friends, maybe a beachside dinner. Not this. Not headlines and chandeliers and curated guest lists. That dream had been quietly replaced. She hadn't even noticed when it happened. She hung up the call after a few more exchanges, then sat back in the hush of the room, the photo album heavy in her lap. On the coffee table sat a folded invitation that had arrived that morning, elegant, gold embossed. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. Outside the window, wind brushed through the trees, bending the branches in slow arcs. She watched them sway, their movement calm, deliberate, untouched by the noise of human performance. Inside, the album lay open again on her knees. One photo, just her, sitting cross-legged on a windowsill, sunlight on her face. Darius had taken that one. She remembered feeling completely herself in that moment, unaware she'd ever lose that version of her. The photo smiled gently up at her. A still image of someone who hadn't yet learned what love without safety can cost. That afternoon, the apartment held a particular stillness. The kind that follows a morning of remembering too much. Alina sat at her desk near the window, soft light pooling over scattered sketches and notebooks. Her hands moved across the page, pencil in steady motion as she refined the lines of an archway, part of a new hotel lobby concept. The work was meditative, mechanical in a way, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. Her phone buzzed beside her, breaking the rhythm. A new message from Leon. "Dinner tonight? Or I can swing by your studio. We could just get drinks after." She read the message twice, then smiled. Small, real. Fingers hovering above the keyboard, she typed back, "Dinner sounds perfect. I'll be free by 6. And just like that, something shifted. Not dramatically, just a gentle recalibration inside her chest, like a tight knot slowly loosening. She leaned back in her chair and let the pencil roll out of her hand. Across the room, on the coffee table, the unopened invitation still sat like a dare, but it no longer pulled at her the way it had earlier. Not now. Not in this light. She stood and stretched, the ache in her lower back reminding her of the growing life inside her. She placed a hand there instinctively, protective, steady. Then she moved to the bookshelf, third shelf down tucked behind a row of old architecture textbooks, and pulled out a slim, hardbound folder. It held the contract she'd signed just last week, her first major deal with a boutique hotel chain, a real opportunity, a real shift. Carter Design Studio. She whispered the name aloud sometimes, just to hear it. The surname she'd kept after the divorce, not out of sentiment, but because it had become her own before it had ever been his. A name on paper, on blueprints, on office doors. Her name. Leon had been the first to ask about it, gently curious, never pushing. He never asked how broken she had been. He only noticed how she kept showing up, kept trying. They had met at a fundraiser Amira insisted she attend, a night she almost skipped. Leon had stood near the sculpture exhibit, quiet, almost unnoticeable at first glance, until he wasn't. They talked for hours, not about trauma or history, just about texture, light, design, the importance of soft chairs in hard rooms. He made her laugh, not the nervous kind, but the kind that feels earned. She didn't know then how long he would stay. But 2 months later, he still showed up. At dinners, at quiet mornings with coffee, at gallery openings she was too tired to attend, but went anyway, because he always asked in a way that made it feel like a choice. The photo album remained closed now, the invitation unopened, but her sketchpad was full, her phone had new messages, and the apartment no longer felt like a waiting room for pain. Outside, the sun had begun to dip, casting long gold shadows across the floor. And, in that warm hush, Alina realized something. Healing didn't announce itself. It didn't knock. It just slowly made space where grief used to live, like a room rearranged where the light finally falls just right. Evening came wrapped in a quiet glow. The city outside was soft with twilight, lights just beginning to blink on in the distance, as if exhaling into night. Maison Étoile sat tucked along a quiet corner in the old part of town, part bistro, part memory. Alina stepped through the door beside Leon, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. The warmth of it lingered longer than the touch. The host greeted them with recognition, ushering them past the small crowd toward a candlelit table near the window. The place smelled like butter and roasted herbs. Everything felt measured. Glass polished, napkins perfectly folded, soft jazz playing just loud enough to suggest elegance without arrogance. Leon pulled out her chair. "I ordered your favorite," he said with a smile, taking his seat across from her. Alina glanced at the deep red wine being poured. None for her, of course, but the gesture still landed with care. The server brought sparkling water instead, and Leon's eyes met hers across the flickering candle. "To new beginnings," he said simply, raising his glass. She tapped hers gently to his. The sound was delicate, like something that could break, but didn't. They talked easily over the first course. Alina found herself speaking with unusual energy about her latest design sketches, the lobby redesign, the wall textures, the lighting concept that mimicked natural sunrise. Leon listened the way few people did. Not just politely, but as if her words were architecture themselves, worth building on. It felt natural to lean in, to laugh once, softly, to forget how long it had been since dinner felt like a place she wanted to stay in, not escape from. Between courses he reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His thumb moved gently against the back of hers, almost absently. "I've been thinking," he said after a pause. "I'd like to introduce you to some people. From my world." Alina tilted her head slightly. "Your world?" He nodded, hesitating just enough to be honest. "Colleagues, friends, people I've known a long time. I've been slow to open that door, not because I'm hiding anything, but because, well, it's complicated, and I didn't want to bring any noise into something that already felt right." His voice was quiet now, careful. Alina watched him, this man with kind eyes and a guarded edge. She understood the hesitation. She had her own. "Is this about the fundraiser?" she asked gently. He smiled. "It's just one night, but I want you there, with me." A pause stretched between them. She took a breath. "Then I'll come." The words settled in the air like something placed down with care. Leon looked relieved, but not surprised, as if he had hoped but wouldn't have pushed. They finished dinner slowly, without hurry, shared a slice of dark chocolate torte, talked about books, music, bad childhood haircuts. Alina told a story about losing her sketchbook in Paris and drawing on napkins for 3 days. He laughed. She did too. It was late when they finally stepped out. The night had cooled. Leon's driver waited at the curb in a sleek black car. Alina hesitated for a moment, still not used to the ease of it, but she let him open the door, let him settle beside her, and didn't flinch when the city blurred past. Inside the quiet hum of the car, she leaned slightly toward him and closed her eyes. It wasn't love yet, but it was something that made room for her. And in the reflection of the window as streetlights passed like distant stars, she saw herself. Not polished, not perfect, but present. And that was enough. Morning filtered into the studio slowly, soft through the tall windows, casting golden angles across Alina's drafting table. The room smelled faintly of cedar and graphite. Her sketchpad lay open. Yesterday's lines paused mid-thought. The city murmured below, just enough to remind her it was still there. She sat with one leg tucked beneath her. A mug of lukewarm tea balanced on the windowsill. Across the room, rolls of tracing paper leaned against the wall, some unraveling at the edges. She hadn't touched them in hours. Instead, her phone buzzed from the desk. It was Amira. "Did you hear?" Her voice came through bright and breathless. "Brandon and Vanessa are throwing their engagement party at the Four Seasons next week, and get this, word is you're on the guest list." Alina blinked. "I what?" she asked, her voice more tired than surprised. Amira sighed, less amused now. "Apparently Vanessa insisted, said something about grace and maturity. But everyone knows it's for show." Alina exhaled, the sound soft but weighted. She looked around the studio, not at anything in particular, just needing somewhere to place the news. "Are you okay?" Amira asked gently. "I'm not sure," Alina answered. "Maybe." After they hung up, she moved through the space without urgency. Watered the plants, fed the cat that wasn't hers but visited most mornings, opened a new set of pens and closed them again. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Why now? Vanessa's invitation felt deliberate. Not cruel, exactly, but something close to it. Like a beautifully wrapped reminder of what Alina no longer belonged to. She remembered the first year of marriage, when anniversaries were handwritten notes and quiet dinners at home. Darius used to draw stars on napkins when he was nervous. He hadn't drawn anything in years. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Leon. "Hope your day's going well. Dinner again soon?" She smiled, small and unforced. Typed back, "Would love that. Things are strange today, tell you later." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. Not by much, but enough to breathe differently. She turned back to her table and picked up a pencil. Began sketching slow curves into the outline of a lobby entrance, clean, modern, grounded. With every line, she felt more anchored, less reactive. This was her space now. Her name on the drawings, her work, not the aftermath of someone else's ambition. Later that evening, at home, she opened her mailbox and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, heavier than the others. Her name was written in soft gold script. She didn't open it right away. She held it in her hand as she walked inside, sat on the couch, and stared at it under the soft light of her living room lamp. It sat there, quiet, beautiful, intrusive. Like a knock she didn't remember inviting. That night, the envelope remained unopened on the coffee table. Alina sat curled in the corner of her couch, one knee drawn up, a blanket resting over her legs. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of tires on wet pavement. Her tea had long gone cold. She didn't reach for it. The envelope still sat there, thick, expensive, deliberate. She picked it up, finally, turning it over in her hands. The weight of it felt like more than paper. It felt like theater. Like a performance that had cast her as a supporting role in a play she hadn't agreed to join. Her fingers slipped under the flap. Inside, an ivory card, embossed gold letters, and the names she already knew. Mr. Brandon Ellis and Miss Vanessa Royce. "Request the pleasure of your company." She stopped reading. It wasn't the words that stung. It was what they implied, that her presence was decorative, that her past could be neatly folded into someone else's present. She placed the card back in the envelope, slower than necessary, and set it aside again. Her mind drifted, not to the wedding or the party, but to a different evening. Years ago, a night in their second apartment. She had burned dinner. The smoke alarm had gone off. Darius had opened every window while she laughed so hard she cried. They'd eaten takeout on the floor that night. He'd said he didn't care about the food. He just liked coming home to her. That version of him had felt real once. But memories soften with time. They don't vanish. They just lose their urgency. What hurt becomes quieter. What mattered becomes mixed with what didn't. A soft knock pulled her back. Not at the door. Her phone. Leon. She answered with a soft, "Hey." "Was thinking of you," he said. "You okay?" There was a pause, short but full. "I got the invitation," she said, "to their engagement party." Another pause. "Do you want to go?" he asked, his voice careful but open. "I don't know yet." Leon didn't push. "Whatever you decide, I'll be there." It wasn't a promise, not in the dramatic sense, just something steady, something true. After they hung up, Alina looked down at the envelope again. It hadn't changed, still the same curve of letters, the same sheen, but now it looked smaller somehow, less important. She turned off the lamp beside her. In the half-light of the room, the envelope glowed faintly, not like an invitation, more like a reminder that she could choose to stay home or not. But either way, she'd stopped waiting for someone else to tell her who she was. The dress hung from the doorway, untouched. Emerald green, simple lines, clean neckline, the kind of fabric that whispered rather than shouted. Alina stood a few feet away, arms crossed, as if looking at a version of herself she hadn't met yet. Amira had stopped by earlier to help with her hair, half pinned, half loose. "You'll look like power wrapped in grace," she'd said, grinning. But now, alone in the soft hush of Leon's penthouse, Alina wasn't so sure what she looked like. Leon stepped out of the bedroom, adjusting the cuff of his dark suit. He paused when he saw her standing still. "You okay?" he asked gently. Alina nodded. "Just gathering myself." He didn't press, just crossed the room and stood beside her, not touching the dress, just taking it in with her. "It's beautiful," he said. "But it's not what makes you strong." She met his eyes and smiled, almost embarrassed. "I know, I want to walk in there feeling like I belong, not like someone who used to be part of the picture." Leon tilted his head. "You've never needed permission to belong." The words settled quietly between them. A few minutes later, she slipped into the dress. It fit the way something does when it's not trying too hard. She turned once in the mirror, not to admire, just to recognize. And when they finally left, stepping into the car that waited below, Alina felt calm, not confident exactly, but anchored. Her hand rested on her stomach, a reflex now. The city blurred past, glass and steel and distant headlights, and when they arrived, the Laurelwood Hotel shimmered like it had been staged for a dream. Cameras clicked softly. People turned, subtly curious. Inside, the ballroom bloomed with crystal chandeliers and champagne. Names floated around her like perfume. Investors, artists, old names with new power. But it wasn't until they stepped into the main room that the moment sharpened. A woman with auburn hair approached, striking, composed, wrapped in silk and charm. "Damien," she said brightly. "And who is this?" Alina extended her hand, steady. "Monica," Leon said. "This is Alina, my partner." Monica smiled wider. "An architect? Wonderful. We must talk about Berkeley's new cultural wing." They spoke briefly. Alina smiled, answered, nodded. But inside there was still a faint echo of doubt, soft but present. As more people came and went, she drifted to a quieter corner. The exhibit lining the back wall drew her in. Photos of outreach projects, school children, green fields reborn. She paused at one image, an aerial shot of a village hospital, white against red earth. The caption read, "What we build matters. But who we build it for matters more." She read it twice, and somewhere in that moment, away from chandeliers and introductions, she felt it again. That quiet knowing she'd carried since the first time she held a pencil and believed it could shape a future. Behind her, laughter rose and glasses clinked. She stayed where she was, still, small, steady, like a foundation, hidden but holding. She hadn't heard that voice in years, but her body remembered it before her mind did. "Alina Carter? Is that really you?" She turned slowly. David Russell stood there, wine glass in hand, his expression split between recognition and something harder to name, curiosity maybe, or amusement. He looked almost the same expensive haircut, same tailored ease, the kind of man who always seemed half in conversation with himself. Darius had once said David knew how to work a room without making it sweat. "David," she said, polite but measured, "didn't expect to see you here." He grinned, eyes flicking down to her dress, then back up. "You look good." She nodded once. "Thanks." There was a pause, too brief to be awkward, too long to be warm. "I've got a table at the engagement party," he said, lifting his glass a little. "Brandon and Vanessa, you going?" Alina didn't answer immediately. Her spine had already straightened. Her hand curled gently around the edge of her clutch. "I haven't decided," she said carefully. David smirked. "You should. Brandon's been talking nonstop. Big plans, big future. Apparently Vanessa's dad has political connections. He's not just aiming for business anymore. He's aiming for legacy." The words were light, but the message wasn't. And beneath them, something in Alina bristled. Not just for herself, but for the version of her that had once tried so hard to believe in Darius's version of us. "I'm here with someone," she said, voice even. David blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah? Who?" Before she could answer, a soft presence arrived at her side. Leon, his hand found the small of her back, steady and grounding. "Hi," he said to David, nodding once. "I'm Leon." David looked at him the way people look at unfamiliar art, trying to find a flaw before admitting it's good. "Of course," he said eventually. "Well, hope you both enjoy the night." And just like that, he slipped back into the crowd. Wine glass tilting, charm resumed. Leon turned to her, eyes questioning but gentle. "Everything okay?" She nodded, grateful for the interruption. "Just someone from a long time ago." He didn't ask more, just touched her elbow lightly. "Want to get some air?" "Yes, please." They stepped onto a side terrace, where the noise dulled behind glass and the night air was cooler, easier to breathe. The city stretched out below them, lights blinking like quiet signals from a world that didn't know them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, more to herself than to him, "He made me feel small. Just now, like I was a part of something I'd already let go." Leon looked at her with a softness she couldn't explain. "You're not small," he said. And the way he said it, steady, without needing her to respond, was enough. Inside, the party continued. But out here, Alina felt something she hadn't in a long time. Untouched, not by the past, not by anyone's expectations. Just herself, on her own terms. A woman in a green dress beneath a silver sky, learning to breathe without apology. The ballroom had shifted by the time they stepped back inside. The music had softened, the energy more subdued. Glasses clinked in quieter rhythms now. Voices had dropped just slightly, and the flow of people had begun to circle around something, someone, near the center of the room. Alina spotted him before he saw her. Brandon. He stood by the grand floral display, surrounded by people in suits and silk, his hand resting at the small of Vanessa's back. He looked polished, practiced, the kind of man who knew where the cameras were, even when none were pointed. Vanessa was radiant in silver. She smiled easily, her movements precise, as if each gesture had already been rehearsed. Together they looked a magazine cover, curated, elegant, expensive. And then his eyes found Alina. Just for a second. She felt it, the brief flicker of recognition, of calculation, of something else buried beneath. But then it was gone. He nodded politely. Vanessa turned too, and for a moment the past and present collided in a single exchange of glances. "Alina," Vanessa said warmly, extending a hand. "So glad you could make it. Brandon told me you two ran into each other." Alina accepted the handshake. "Yes, it was unexpected." Vanessa smiled, her tone breezy. "Well, life's full of surprises." Brandon cleared his throat. "Leon," he said, acknowledging the man beside her. "Good to see you again." Leon nodded. "Likewise. Congratulations." The air between them was cordial but thin, a kind of tension that wore a suit and shook hands but never quite sat down. Then, as quickly as it started, the exchange ended. Vanessa guided Brandon back into the crowd, leaving only the echo of perfume and the weight of memory. Alina let out a slow breath. "You okay?" Leon asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, just strange, seeing it like this." They moved toward the buffet, where Amira waved them over, armed with a glass of Prosecco and a wicked grin. "Your ex has the emotional range of a linen napkin," she whispered once Brandon was out of earshot. "But you look like an empress, so I'd say the universe is still balanced." Alina smiled. It helped. For the next half hour they drifted from small group to small group, exchanging pleasantries, collecting names she'd forget by morning. Most people were kind, curious. Some offered polite nods when they realized who she was. She noticed the way eyes lingered, not long enough to be rude, but long enough to weigh. There she was, the ex-wife, the woman from before. But she didn't shrink. She stood tall in her green dress, answered when spoken to, smiled when she meant it. Let silence do the rest. And somewhere between passing trays and champagne flutes, she realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't bracing anymore. She wasn't waiting for approval or explanation, or for Brandon to finally see her. She didn't need to be seen by him anymore. Across the ballroom, Brandon laughed at something. Vanessa touched his arm, and Alina turned away. Not out of pain, but because the version of herself that needed his attention no longer existed. A hush began to settle over the room, not sudden but gradual, like a curtain falling in slow motion. Brandon stepped up to the microphone near the bandstand, tapping it once, then twice. The soft chime pulled attention toward him like gravity. Vanessa stood just behind him, hands folded, smiling in that smooth, practiced way that photographs well. "Good evening," Brandon began, voice amplified but smooth, easy. Thank you all for coming tonight. Vanessa and I are honored, truly, to be surrounded by so many friends and colleagues as we celebrate this next chapter. Alina stood near the edge of the room, a flute of sparkling cider in her hand, untouched. Leon was beside her, close enough to feel, but not speaking. Just present. Brandon's voice drifted through the air, words like gratitude, journey, future. Alina heard them, but didn't really listen. She studied his posture instead, still confident, still centered, like he was most alive when the room tilted toward him. She remembered that part of him well. The way he could light up under pressure, how words came to him like oxygen. How easy it had been to believe him. Vanessa stepped forward next, taking the mic with a polished smile. I couldn't be more grateful to be standing beside Brandon tonight, she said. He's the kind of man who dreams boldly, who pushes forward with vision, and I've never felt more certain about the future we're building together. The applause was polite, measured. Alina's gaze drifted from the couple to the crowd, heads nodding, glasses raised, smiles flickering at the edges, the choreography of wealth and approval. Leon leaned toward her. You've handled this like a queen, he said softly. She smiled, faint and true. I'm ready to go soon. But before they could slip away, a new voice cut through the murmur behind them. Sharp, cool, familiar. Leaving already? You haven't even congratulated the bride properly. Alina turned slowly. Patricia Walsh. Hair set perfectly, pearls at her throat, and that same tight smile she used to wear at holiday dinners, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Hello, Patricia, Alina said, voice steady. Patricia looked her up and down, then to Leon, then back. And this is? Leon extended a hand. Leon, I'm here with Alina. Patricia took it like it might break her manicure. You look familiar. Leon's expression didn't shift. Perhaps we've met at a fundraiser. Possibly. Then to Alina, well, it's good you've moved on. Though I always wondered, did you ever appreciate what Brandon brought to your life? The old sting bloomed, briefly, but it didn't anchor. Alina met her gaze calmly. With all due respect, that's no longer your concern. I wish them well. For the first time, Patricia's expression faltered. Just a hair. Just enough. Well then, she said, clutching her purse tighter. Do enjoy the party. She turned and walked away, heels sharp against the marble. Leon touched Alina's back, grounding her again. You all right? She nodded. They stepped out onto a small terrace just beyond the ballroom. The doors closed behind them, muffling the music, the voices, the performance. The city stretched out below, lights like distant thoughts. The air was crisp, the kind that carried memory but not weight. Alina looked out and thought of all the versions of herself that had once stood behind closed doors, unsure of her worth. Now, the only door that mattered was the one she had just chosen to walk through. And it didn't lead back. The terrace air was cooler than expected. It wrapped gently around Alina's shoulders like a borrowed coat. She stood quietly beside Leon, both of them facing the glittering spread of the city below. Somewhere behind them, champagne flowed and conversations resumed, the kind that float between power and performance. I used to feel small in places like this, she said quietly, as if confessing to the night itself. Leon glanced over. Do you still? She shook her head slowly. Not with you here. There was a calm in the moment, quiet but earned. But before it could settle fully, a ripple of sound, sharp and rising, broke through the walls of the ballroom. They turned instinctively. Something had shifted. Inside, the lights seemed too bright, voices a little too loud. Guests had begun to gather near the center of the room again, but this time not for a toast. Brandon stood at the mic once more, Vanessa at his side, her expression no longer calm. She looked composed but tight, like someone trying to hold porcelain without dropping it. Please, Brandon's voice called out, louder now. Everyone, just a moment. People stilled. Alina felt her pulse flicker, her grip on Leon's arm tightening ever so slightly. A security guard moved through the crowd. Not fast, but with purpose. His steps curved toward them. Excuse me, he said carefully, his gaze landing on Leon. Mr. Westwood, we need a word. The room shifted again, this time sharper, like glass beneath bare feet. What's going on? Alina asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. There's been a call, the guard said. A concern about a guest's credentials. The words were neutral. The tone wasn't. Gasps didn't echo. They whispered, just enough to build tension, not drama. Brandon's voice came through the mic again, smoother now, but no less pointed. We just need to confirm something. A minor mix-up, I'm sure. Alina turned to Leon. He was still, calm, but she knew the tension behind his composure. He stepped forward without resistance, reaching into his jacket. I have identification, he said evenly, and a business card. You can call the number. The security guard nodded, speaking into his earpiece. Alina could feel every eye in the room shift toward them, and somewhere near the back, she saw Patricia, arms folded, watching. Not surprised. Then a voice cut through the quiet, older, colder. I placed the call. The crowd turned. Gerald Royce, Vanessa's father, stepped forward, composed in a way that didn't need volume. He looked straight at Leon, his words clipped. I've heard things about you, rumors that your fortune isn't what you claim, that you've inserted yourself where you don't belong. The words weren't about Leon. They were about boundaries, about who gets to belong. Alina felt something deep in her stomach go still. Not fear, not quite anger, just the recognition of an old pattern, power dressed as protection, the kind that tries to decide who's worthy of the room. Leon didn't flinch. He handed the card over. If you call that number, someone will confirm. The guard stepped away, already dialing. The room held its breath, and in the silence that followed, Alina stood straighter. Not beside him, but with him, not defending, just being. The kind of presence that doesn't ask permission. The guard moved away, murmuring into his earpiece. His voice was low, clipped, professional, but the silence he left behind grew louder with each second. All around them, conversation had stopped. Guests stood still, not out of panic, but curiosity. That quiet, sharpened kind. The kind that dresses up as concern but feeds on spectacle. Leon remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, his face unreadable, but not cold. More like someone who had walked through rooms like this before and already knew how they ended. Alina stood beside him, not touching him, not speaking, but so clearly on his side that it didn't need to be said aloud. Gerald Royce didn't budge either. His gaze remained fixed on Leon, not confrontational, just clinical, like he was auditing a balance sheet. I'm not here to cause trouble, Leon said quietly. I was invited. I came in good faith. And yet, Gerald replied, we still find ourselves wondering. He looked around the room like he owned it. That was the thing about men like Gerald. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. A minute passed, maybe two. Then the guard returned, a small earpiece still curled behind his ear. He walked with purpose, but no urgency. It's confirmed, he said simply. Mr. Westwood is who he says he is. He handed the card back to Leon, then stepped away, his job complete. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not relief, not applause, just the subtle retraction of judgment, the quick reshuffling of social posture. People picked up their glasses again. Conversation started in hushed tones. The moment was already being rewritten in real time. Alina didn't exhale right away. Leon nodded, then turned to Brandon and Vanessa, his voice calm. Congratulations again, but I think we'll be leaving now. There was no anger in his tone, no righteousness, just something final. Brandon tried to recover, something about confusion, a mistake, how this wasn't personal. Vanessa didn't say anything. She looked embarrassed, her smile frayed at the edges. Gerald's expression never changed. He stepped back into the crowd without comment, already fading into the blur of money and glass. Leon offered Alina his arm. She took it. They walked out together, the way they had walked in, not loudly, not defiantly, but with quiet clarity. Outside, the night wrapped around them like a softer truth. The air was cooler now, the street quieter. Somewhere in the distance a siren called out and then faded. In the car, Alina sat beside him, her hand resting on her lap. Not clenched, just still. I'm sorry, she said finally. Leon looked over. For what? For having to prove yourself. He shook his head once, almost smiling. I've done it before. But Alina knew something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in him. And in her too. Because once again someone had tried to decide who belonged. And once again, she'd learned that the most powerful answer wasn't anger or explanation. It was presence. It was leaving with your head high, your name intact, and your hand in the right one. The sun rose slow and silver over the city. Not bright, just steady. A kind of light that didn't ask to be noticed but arrived anyway. Alina sat at the kitchen island in Leon's penthouse, barefoot, a mug of tea cooling between her palms. The night before felt far away and strangely close, like a dream she wasn't quite finished leaving. The silence of the space was comfortable, not heavy, like the apartment understood when to speak and when not to. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then again. She turned it over. "Amira, you're in the news. Everywhere." Alina opened the link. A headline blinked back at her. "Billionaire guest called out at high society soiree. Turns out he's more legit than anyone in the room." She skimmed the article. Photos of Leon at the party, Brandon mid-speech, even one of her from the terrace. Her name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. The comment section buzzed with speculation. Who was the woman with Westwood? Was this a quiet power couple no one saw coming? Alina closed the tab. She didn't feel powerful. She felt raw. Like someone who had walked barefoot across polished stone, smiling the whole way, only to find her soles bruised in the morning. Leon walked in a few minutes later, sleeves rolled, coffee in hand. He leaned against the counter, watching her for a beat before speaking. "How bad is it?" he asked. She shrugged. "Depends who you ask." He smiled softly. "And what do you think?" Alina looked at him, the man who had stood still while a room tried to disassemble him, who had handed over a business card like it was a shield he hated needing to carry. "I think you handled it better than anyone should ever have to," she said. Leon didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, reached for her free hand, and traced a slow line over her knuckles with his thumb. "I've been questioned before," he said finally, "but it's different when you're next to me. I don't like them pulling you into it." "I'm not afraid of their judgment," she said. "No," he replied, "but I still don't want you to have to wear it." She nodded, quiet for a while. When she finally looked at him again, her eyes were steady. "Then let's change the conversation." Outside, the city moved on. Cabs cut through intersections. A woman walked a golden retriever down the block, holding coffee in one hand, leash in the other. But inside, there was only the hum of morning, the warmth of two hands held across a countertop, and the realization that sometimes strength doesn't show up in the headlines. It shows up in the quiet, in the moments after the noise, when the truth still feels like your own. 3 days later, Alina stood in front of the gallery wall, arms loosely crossed, eyes fixed on a painting she'd seen a dozen times but never quite this way. It was Leon's, one of his earlier works. A large canvas, almost abstract but with just enough form to suggest movement. A woman, alone in a room, her outline dissolving into brushstrokes. The walls around her bent inward, like the space was folding over itself, like it couldn't hold her anymore. Alina tilted her head, studying the edges. Leon stepped beside her, silent. "I always thought she was trapped," she said quietly. "But now I think she might just be changing shape." Leon looked at the painting for a long moment. "That's closer to what I meant," he said. "But I painted it before I knew that's what I was feeling." They moved slowly through the gallery, past pieces curated for an upcoming event, a private showcase for patrons and press. Leon had invited her to walk the space with him, to see it before the world stepped in. It felt like a gesture of trust, not just invitation. As they moved from canvas to canvas, Alina found herself lingering more with the quiet pieces. The ones where color whispered instead of shouting, where figures blurred rather than stood bold. Maybe it was pregnancy. Maybe it was the recent noise. But lately she was drawn to things that allowed space, things that didn't demand anything of her. "Do you ever miss being unknown?" she asked. Leon smiled softly. "All the time, but I also remember how lonely it felt." They stopped at the last wall, where an empty frame had been mounted in preparation for a new piece. Alina stared at the blank space. Something about it stilled her. "I used to think I had to fill every part of my life," she said, "like I had to prove I was worth the space I took up." She didn't expect the words. They just came. Leon didn't reply right away. Instead, he gently touched her wrist, as grounding her. "You don't owe anyone a finished picture," he said. "Not even me." And somehow, that mattered more than 1,000 reassurances. Later, they stood near the gallery doors as staff began arriving, voices and footsteps slowly breaking the silence. Leon turned to her. "I'm leaving for Rome next week," he said. "A short trip, to meet with the architects for the Florence wing." Alina looked up. "You want me to come?" "I do, but only if you want to. No pressure. Just the idea of you being there feels right." She nodded once. Not a promise, not a plan, just a quiet yes that hadn't taken full shape yet. He left to take a call. Alina stood alone again, facing the empty frame. It held nothing, but somehow it felt like the most honest piece in the room. A space not yet defined, and for the first time in a long time that didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something beginning. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Slim, white, unassuming. It was waiting in Alina's mailbox, tucked between a grocery flyer and a minimalist catalog she hadn't subscribed to. No return address, just her name written in that familiar, all too precise handwriting. Darius. She stood at the kitchen counter, staring at it. The sound of the kettle behind her began to rise, steam hissing from the spout, a background tension she hadn't noticed until it was too loud. She turned it off. Then she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. No greeting, no signature, just a date, a time, and an address, one of the downtown law offices. Below that, final review of property documents, please confirm. Alina exhaled, not loudly, just enough to let the stillness shift. She hadn't spoken to Darius since the party, since the night she left without a word, since the public unmasking of things she used to whisper about only to herself. And now, this. A meeting, a legal end to the last remnants of what once was home. She set the letter down and walked to the window. The city moved steadily beneath her, unaware. She watched a man below wrangle a folded stroller into the trunk of his car. A woman passed with a child balanced on her hip, one shoe missing. Mundane scenes, quiet truths. They reminded her that closure doesn't always look like revelation. Sometimes it's just paperwork. Still, something tugged at her ribs. She remembered a night early in their marriage, when their apartment flooded from a burst pipe upstairs. She and Darius had moved their things to higher ground, barefoot, soaked, laughing from exhaustion. He'd made tea on the stove by candlelight, claimed it was adventure. Back then he could turn inconvenience into charm. She hadn't thought of that night in years. Now, even the memory felt borrowed. Later, she called her lawyer to confirm the appointment. "It'll be straightforward," he said. "Standard asset division. You've already negotiated the hard parts." But the hard parts weren't in the papers. They were in the spaces between what was kept and what was left behind. Alina hung up, then sat at her desk, flipping open her notebook. Her pen moved without thinking, shapes, then lines, then a soft curve that became a doorway. She wasn't angry. She wasn't grieving. She was simply clearing space. And on the counter, the letter lay folded again. Neat. Final. Like a period at the end of a sentence she no longer needed to reread. The law office was quiet in the way hospitals are, sterile, muted, heavy with things unsaid. Alina sat in the waiting room, a clipboard on her lap, though all the necessary papers had already been filled. She hadn't worn anything dramatic. Just a navy dress, low heels, a jacket she didn't need but had put on anyway. Not for warmth, for armor. Across from her, a glass wall looked into a conference room. Neutral walls, water pitchers, an arrangement of pens that no one would steal. The kind of place built to look impartial. Her lawyer came out first, offering a nod. Behind him the door opened again. Darius. He looked the same, almost irritatingly so. Crisp suit, hair just touched with gray at the temples, an aging he'd wear like prestige. He didn't smile, just nodded. Alina. Darius. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just walked into the room and sat on opposite sides of a polished table that smelled faintly of lemon and thyme. The meeting began. Language turned technical. Assets, percentages, property titles. The cadence of closure. Alina listened closely, nodded where needed, initialed documents with a pen she didn't bring. Her voice never wavered, though once her hand did. Halfway through, Darius spoke directly to her for the first time. "I kept the lake house," he said. "But I had the guest room painted blue." Alina looked up. A pause. She knew what he meant. That room once meant for a nursery. She nodded once, then returned to the document in front of her. Somewhere in the process, someone offered coffee. Neither of them took it. Later, with only 2 pages left to sign, Darius spoke again. "You seem, well." It wasn't quite a compliment, more like an observation made from a distance. Alina looked at him, really looked. "I am," she said. "And you?" He hesitated. Then, mostly. A long pause stretched between them. Not tense, just full. She wanted to ask something. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe the space between them was enough. Maybe the not saying held more truth than anything spoken could. When they were finished, they stood. Darius reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope. Slim, handwritten. He placed it on the table between them. "You don't have to read it," he said. Then he turned and left. Alina didn't pick it up right away. She watched the door slowly swing closed behind him, then returned to stillness. The room was quiet again. Outside, the clouds had shifted. Light filtered in through the glass, catching on the envelope's edge. She took it, held it in her hands, not to open, not yet, just to feel the weight of it. A letter at the end of a life they'd once built together, words that might explain or regret or reach, but for now, it was just paper. And the chair he'd left behind was still slightly turned toward her. The letter sat on her nightstand for 3 days, unopened. Alina moved around it like something fragile. She'd pick it up, carry it to another room, then return it. She thought about throwing it away. She thought about reading it right away. But instead, it lived in limbo, between choice and hesitation. On the 4th night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city breathed in low, rhythmic pulses. A streetlight flickered 2 blocks down, unnoticed by most but visible from her bedroom window. She got up, slipped on a sweater, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. Made tea she didn't want, the kind of ritual that gave her hands something to do while her mind wandered. Back in the bedroom, she finally picked up the envelope, sat on the edge of the bed, opened it. Inside, a single page, typed, no salutation, just Darius's voice, stripped of charm, but not quite stripped of sentiment. "I didn't know how to say any of this in person. Maybe that's a flaw I'll always carry. I didn't leave our marriage, I let it hollow. That's different, but no less damaging. You were trying, I wasn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I saw you. Even when I didn't act like it, I see you now. And I'm sorry I didn't meet you there when it mattered most." That was all. No signature, no plea. Just an ending that landed quietly, like snow on concrete. Alina folded the letter slowly. Her chest didn't ache. Not exactly, but something inside her shifted, like a drawer long stuck finally opening. No anger spilled out, no relief either, just understanding. And something else, a kind of sadness, not for what was lost, but for what was never built right to begin with. She set the letter back down, went to the window. The city below was soft and distant, a constellation of lives continuing. She rested her hand on her belly, feeling a slow, steady movement. Not a kick, just a roll, a quiet reminder. There were still chapters to write. But this page, this one, was turned. Not torn, not burned, just quietly folded and placed in the drawer she no longer needed to keep open. Florence greeted her like a quiet friend. The plane had landed just after dawn. The light stretched soft across the Tuscan hills, golden and familiar even though she'd never been here before. The city wasn't loud with its beauty. It unfolded slowly, like someone telling a story without needing to rush. Alina stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, her hand wrapped around a cup of herbal tea. Below, the Arno moved gently, reflecting rows of weathered buildings in its glassy surface. She breathed in the scent of early summer, stone, sun, distant jasmine. Leon had gone ahead to the foundation site, meeting with the design team. She'd join him later. For now, he'd insisted she rest. No pressure, no plans, just space. She hadn't realized how much she needed it. Inside the suite, her sketchbook sat open on the desk, an unfinished drawing curling slightly at the corners. She hadn't drawn since the letter. Not out of avoidance, but because something inside had needed stillness more than movement. She ran her thumb along the edge of the page, then stepped back outside. The soft roundness of her belly pressed gently against the railing. She rested her hand there, not out of habit this time, but out of connection. In the distance, a bell tower chimed the hour. She remembered a different sound, years ago, when she and Darius had visited Vermont in the fall. A smaller trip, back when small still felt sacred. They had sat on the porch of a rented cabin, watching leaves fall in sheets of color. He had held her hand then, half asleep, and whispered something about the future. It hadn't been a promise, just a possibility. Now, those moments felt less like loss and more like weather. Something that had passed through her and gone. She smiled faintly at the thought. Not every memory needed to be mourned. Later, she would walk down to the cafe across the street, order something flaky and warm, maybe write a postcard she'd never send. But for now, she just stood there. A woman on a balcony in a city she didn't know yet, looking out at a river that had carried other lives before hers and would carry more after. The sun rose a little higher, catching on the edge of a window across the street. And for the first time in months, Alina didn't wonder what came next. She just let the moment stay. It came folded in thirds, tucked inside a pale blue envelope. No name on the front, just an address in Darius's handwriting. The paper was lighter this time. Thinner. As if even the words inside were unsure of their place. Alina found it on the table of the cafe downstairs. The concierge said it had been dropped off earlier, hand-delivered. She sat at the corner table, cappuccino cooling beside her, the city moving at a gentle hum just beyond the window. Tourists walked with maps in hand. A couple passed with a dog tugging at the leash. Ordinary beauty. She opened the letter. "I've thought about writing again for weeks, but I waited. I thought maybe silence would say more. Maybe that would be easier for both of us. But there's something I didn't say in the first letter, and I need to say it now. I didn't just see you. I loved you. In my own broken, misguided way, I did. And I think some part of me always will. That doesn't mean anything now, I know. But maybe one day, you'll believe it wasn't all hollow." Alina read the words slowly, without reaction at first, the kind of stillness that lives between acceptance and something softer. She folded the letter back into its envelope, ran her finger over the crease. Then, she looked out the window again. She didn't feel sorrow. Not exactly. Just the echo of something familiar, a melody she used to know by heart, now just a few notes drifting at the edge of memory. She thought about all the things love had meant over the years, how it had once looked like, and surviving, staying, then surviving, then walking away. Now it looked like this. A letter without a return address, a life no longer waiting for a response, a woman sitting alone at a table whole in a way she hadn't been before. She didn't write back, not out of anger, not even out of closure, but because sometimes the most honest answer is no reply at all. And outside, in the warm Florentine light, a child laughed, sharp, sudden, free. And Alina closed her eyes for a moment, not to forget, just to let go. The rain started just before midnight. Not a storm, just a soft rhythmic tapping against the wide windows of their Florence apartment. Alina stood at the edge of the bedroom, one hand braced on the doorframe, the other resting gently at the curve of her stomach. Something had shifted. Not pain, not panic, just a quiet certainty. She sat down on the edge of the bed and breathed through the pressure, low, deep, steady. The baby moved in response, slow and certain, like a tide rolling in. Leon stirred beside her, voice still laced with sleep. "Is it time?" She nodded, and for the first time in months her smile was unfiltered. "I think so." They moved without urgency. There was a calm to it. Bags already packed, numbers already saved. The car was waiting within minutes, headlights brushing through the soft sheen of rain on the cobblestones. The hospital was quiet when they arrived. White walls, dim lights, nurses moving in practiced stillness. Alina didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her world had narrowed to breath and rhythm, and the slow opening of something far deeper than pain. Hours passed. She remembered fragments. Leon's hand in hers, the sound of her own breath breaking, the soft hum of monitors, a nurse's voice, gentle, almost maternal, the scent of lavender from somewhere she couldn't place. Then, suddenly and completely, the sound. A cry. Sharp, new, alive. Alina's whole body stilled, and then the child was there, placed gently in her arms, small and warm and real. The room didn't disappear. It just faded. Nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the ache, not even the tears that clung silently to the corners of her eyes. Just this moment. Leon leaned over her shoulder, eyes wide, breath held. "He's perfect," he whispered. Alina nodded. And she remembered something Darius once said, long before everything unraveled. "You'll be a wonderful mother. You already know how to make space for people." And now, here she was, making space not out of need, but from fullness. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, closed her eyes. Outside, the rain eased, and the city slept beneath a sky that felt a little newer than it had the day before. The morning after, the world was impossibly still. Sunlight spilled gently across the tiled floor of the hospital room, warming the foot of the bed. Alina sat propped against the pillows, the baby cradled in the crook of her arm. He had finally fallen asleep, his breath light and even, his fingers curled into tiny fists against her chest. Leon sat nearby, a quiet presence in a chair that had clearly not been designed for sleep. His jacket draped over the back, a half-read newspaper folded in his lap. He looked at her, then the child, then back again. Like he still couldn't quite believe either of them were real. They hadn't picked a name yet. They had talked about them, names that held meaning, names with history, names that sounded strong without trying too hard, but nothing had quite settled. Now, in the hush of that new morning, it felt different. Alina traced a finger gently across the baby's cheek, then whispered, "How about Luca?" Leon looked up. "Luca," he repeated, trying it out, then nodded. "It fits." Alina smiled. "It means light, and also, bringer." There was no poetry in her voice, just truth, quiet and whole. Leon reached out, touching the baby's foot with his thumb. "Welcome, Luca." Outside, a nurse entered briefly, gentle, efficient, checking charts and machines. Then she was gone again, leaving only the three of them in the soft glow of morning. Alina glanced toward the window. She remembered a different morning. Years ago, sitting alone in their old kitchen, unopened mail beside her, wondering how she had drifted so far from herself. She had cried without sound that day, not from heartbreak, but from the slow erosion of not being seen. And now here she was. Not repaired, not redeemed, but rewritten. There was no one else in her head, no comparison, no shadow, just her. Leon, Luca. She leaned her head back against the pillow and closed her eyes for a moment. The room held the kind of silence that didn't ache, the kind that wrapped around you like something earned. 2 weeks later, they were home. Not the penthouse, not the Florence apartment, but a modest house just beyond the city's edge, where the tile was uneven, the lemons hung low in the yard, and the quiet had depth rather than weight. It was not a place of status, but of arrival. Alina stood barefoot in the nursery doorway. Linen and fresh paint mingled in the air, while soft sunlight stretched across the crib where Luca slept, his tiny chest rising in steady rhythm, his hand still curled in mid-dream. Leon came up behind her, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, voice barely a breath. She nodded, watching their son. Just watching. He stayed with her a moment longer, then stepped away to take a call. She didn't move. Her eyes lingered on the framed photograph above the crib, a coastline she had once visited alone, long before she realized solitude wasn't something to be solved. Back then, the silence felt sharp. Now, it felt earned. She crossed the room slowly and sat in the rocker by the window, the one Leon had put together with his usual quiet conviction. She touched Luca's knuckles gently, then let her hand rest in her lap. Outside, the lemon tree swayed, unbothered by memory or expectation. There had been a time she waited for others to choose her, a time she confused endurance for love, but not this time. This time she had chosen herself. And in that stillness, no headlines, no grand gestures, no need for vindication, she had rewritten everything. Some stories don't end with thunder. They end in morning light, in breath, in a room built from what you learned to carry gently. Dear friend, life has a quiet way of showing us what truly matters, not through applause or validation, but through the still moments when no one's watching. Alina's journey is a reminder that peace isn't something we stumble upon. It's something we walk toward, often after walking away from what no longer honors us. The Stoics taught that happiness depends on ourselves, that we cannot control the world, only our choices within it. Alina chose peace. She chose love that doesn't need to be loud. And she chose herself. Not the broken version others left behind, but the whole version she rebuilt one breath at a time. Where you begin again doesn't have to look dramatic. It just has to feel true. Start quietly, stay true, and let your stillness speak. If this story resonated with you, we'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories into the world. And remember, you're never alone in your healing.